Weather has often been an incredibly powerful force in competitive singles Pokemon. Whether from the permanent sand of Generation 3, or the bevy of photosynthesis-boosted threats in Generation 9, weather has been shaping the competitive scene, with the exception of Generation 2.
Uh-oh.
4 main weathers exist, all serving different purposes to different teams. Sand and Hail both deal damage to all Pokemon not of certain types on the field, with Sand also boosting the special defense of Rock types by 1.5 times. In Generation 9, Hail was replaced with Snow, which no longer does damage, but instead multiplies the defense of all Ice types by 1.5 times. Sun and Rain both boost the power of certain moves, with Sun giving a boost to Fire-type moves, and Rain giving a boost to Water-type moves. All 4 weathers also have abilities that benefit a Pokemon when that weather is active, such as Slush Rush and Swift Swim. These 4 weathers can be activated through 2 main methods: weather-setting moves and weather-setting abilities. Weather-setting moves were introduced in Generation 2, being more or less useless. Weather-setting abilities, however, changed the competitive landscape of Generation 3 onwards, and this would more or less be the story of weather for every generation. Weather-setting moves seeing little to no use, and weather-setting abilities stirring up entire team styles. The most prominent weather in Generations 3 and 4 is Sandstorm, mostly from Tyranitar, but also Hippowdon. Over in Ubers, Kyogre and Groudon were both incredibly useful and incredibly powerful, both of which also had a weather-setting ability. Generation 5 would then give Pokemon hidden abilities. Most notably for this conversation, Politoed got Drizzle, and Torkoal got Drought. Generation 5 also introduced the ability Sand Rush. Drizzle sets rain on entry, Drought sets harsh sunlight on entry, and Sand Rush doubles a Pokemon's speed when Sandstorm is active. This would be the beginnings of how modern weather teams work, with a Pokemon that sets the weather, and a team full of Pokemon that can abuse that weather. However, before Generation 5, if you wanted to set Sun or Rain, you'd be stuck with weather-setting moves, also known as Manual Weather. Now, Manual Weather has never been anywhere near as common or good as weather-setting abilities, and it more or less makes sense why. Before Generation 6, weather-setting abilities set weather permanently, or at least until another weather was set. Weather-setting moves, however, would only set weather for 5 to 8 turns, depending on if you held certain items. The fact that weather is set instantly is also a huge benefit. If you need to spend a full turn to set up weather, your opponent can either try to stop it from being set, either through taunt or KOing the weather setter, or can take advantage of the free turns provided, such as by getting hazards up or using a setup move. Because of this, the majority of early gen weather setters don't use weather to support their team, but instead use it as a setup move for themselves. Take, for example, Kingdra, a Pokemon with the ability Swift Swim. Upon using Rain Dance, Kingdra not only doubles its speed, but also boosts the power of its Water-type moves by 1.5 times. This lets Rain Dance serve as a pseudo-shift gear, boosting both speed and the power of Kingdra's moves. This helps to negate the drawbacks of Manual Weather, as Kingdra is offensively solid enough that using Taunt on it is very risky, and if you try to set up against it, you risk taking a rain-boosted Surf the next turn. Mind you, Kingdra still isn't amazing, finding itself at D rank on the Gen 3 VR. Similarly, Ludicolo can also use Rain Dance and Swift Swim. While a team with these Pokemon cannot realistically be built entirely around the weather, they do often use already good Pokemon that benefit from the weather, such as running Scissor on Kingdra teams in Generation 4, which makes sense. These Pokemon don't need the weather, which is going to be unreliable to set anyways, but in the case it is set, function much better under it. In Generation 4, there was some sparing usage of Pokemon that would attempt to set rain for their teammates, namely Crobat and Bronzong. Crobat was used for being a fast taunt user, and Bronzong was used for committing war crimes. Teams that used weather setters like this would typically make the entire team around these weather setters, to gain as much value off of these team slots as possible. However, teams like this often have to run 2 weather setters, and can still be a bit unreliable. And with any of these teams, you'd have to contend with over 50% of all teams having Tyranitar. In both Generations 3 and 4, Tyranitar's Sandstream would negate the rain, though the rain Pokemon could at least retaliate with a super effective water-type attack. Kingdra, interestingly, would continue to be a Rain Dance sweeper in Generation 5, despite the fact that the ability Drizzle existed. This is because the combination of Rain Dance and Drizzle was so powerful, it ended up getting banned. Come Generation 6, and Kingdra would at long last stop seeing usage for being a Rain Dance sweeper. Generation 6 had one manual weather setter I would consider notable, that being Manaphy. I'm not entirely sure on this, but I presume it used a combination of Rain Dance to gain the benefit of its ability Hydration, making it automatically wake up from rest, and also boosting the power of its Surfs and Scalds. Generation 7 would come with the inclusion of one of the most interesting manual weather setters yet, Alolan Ninetales. Now what makes Alolan Ninetales so interesting is that it both has a weather setting ability and commonly runs weather setting moves. Alolan Ninetales is also different in another way. It doesn't intend to set weather, but instead attempts to set the move Aurora Veil, a tandem reflect and light screen that halves all damage done to your Pokemon. And Alolan Ninetales has multiple reasons for running manual weather, running Hail in Generation 7 and 8, and Snowscape in Generation 9. The first reason is its high speed. You see, if you and your opponents both send out weather-setting Pokemon, the slower one's weather will override the faster one's weather. Because of Alolan Ninetales' high speed, opposing weather Pokemon will be the ones to set weather. Alolan Ninetales can then use its weather-setting move to change the weather back to either snow or hail, and then use that to set Aurora Veil. Another reason why is that Alolan Ninetales doesn't benefit from just switching in, like the other weather setters do. It needs to set Aurora Veil, and switching it in and out to change the weather to hail can be very difficult to manage on the hyper-offense teams it tends to be on. Running manual weather gets rid of that momentum sink, and also makes it harder to disrupt with your opponent's own weather setter. Just like Alolan Ninetales, Cantonian Ninetales would also run a manual weather move, that being running Sunny Day in Generation 5. This was the generation of the Weather Wars, and being able to stop the weather of Politoed or Tyranitar could be massive for a Sun team. And speaking of OU viable manual weather setters, Galarian Slowking might just be the most viable manual weather setter of all time, outranking all of Torkoal, Pelipper, and Tyranitar on the Gen 9 OU viability ranking. Galarian Slowking has the move Chilly Reception, a move that switches Slowking out, and then sets snow. However, it's tough to classify this as a weather-setting move, as 90% of the time, you're not switching to a weather abuser, just a fast, frail threat. And the remaining 10% of the time, that fast, frail threat is just Choice Specs Kyurem, ready to spam Blizzard. A big reason behind this is that there just isn't any good snow abusers in Generation 9. There are 3 fully evolved Slush Rush Pokemon in Generation 9, that being Satitan, Alolan Sandslash, and Beartic, which all range from bad to worse. Now, if something like Arctozolt was present, this would likely be a very different story, due to it having perfect coverage, and Boltbeak, the electric-type version of Vicious Rend, a move that got Dracovish banned from Overused. And last of the manual snow setters, we have Eiscue, who will run not just 1, but 2 manual weather moves. You see, in Generation 9, Hail was replaced with Snow. Thus, in-game, Eiscue couldn't get both Hail and Snowstorm. However, in the format of National decks, Eiscue retains access to both Hail and Snowstorm. Normally, this isn't very important, especially because Snow is a giant upgrade to Hail in most circumstances. Eiscue, however, is different, because Eiscue has the signature ability Ice Face. Ice Face protects Eiscue from the first physical hit it would take, then changing Eiscue into its No Ice form. If Eiscue is in its No Ice form, and Hail or Snow begins, it changes back into its Ice Face form. By alternating between Hail and Snow, Eiscue can repeatedly regain its Ice Face form, and thus can wall 32 physical attacks without taking any damage. One would be remiss to not mention Rain Dance Gallade, in which someone used the combination of Rain Dance and Teleport on Gallade to have it function as a rain setter. This is bad for more or less all the same reasons other manual rain setters are bad. This is not an advisable strategy, and while there aren't any other notable manual weather setters in Overused that I know of, they are much more common in lower tiers. The reason for this is pretty simple. Lower tiers by nature have a lower power level. What this means is that in the 2 turns it takes to set weather and then switch to a weather abuser, you aren't facing down a Roaring Moon that just got 2 Dragon Dances off and now sweeps your entire team, but instead means that you are facing down a Charizard that just got 2 Dragon Dances off and is 1 hit away from being KO'd by your Rain Sweeper. In Overused by necessity, the only way weather survives is through weather setting abilities. In lower tiers, however, the power level is low enough for weather setting moves to be worth it. The turn spent to set up weather isn't as high of a cost when your opponent doesn't have an absurdly powerful sweeper on their team. For example, Gen 7 PU teams would use Volbeat to either set rain or sun, depending on the team. Volbeat works fairly well as a weather setter, due to its access to Prankster, as well as good supporting moves in Encore and Thunderwave, as well as U-turn for pivoting. Prankster Encore is very useful here, as it heavily limits your opponent's ability to use setup moves, which helps absorb the cost of the turn-setting rain. VGC also uses Manual Weather a fair bit more, but I'm not as knowledgeable about VGC. From my understanding, however, one of the main reasons Manual Weather is used in VGC is that you get the benefits from it immediately. If your teammate sets Weather, your other teammate can then begin to abuse Weather that very turn. The fact that there's not very many turns of Weather is also less of an issue in VGC, where matches are much shorter. However, like I said, VGC really isn't my strong suit, so if you want to explain more about why Manual Weather is good in VGC, tell me about it in the comments. And even with singles Manual Weather, there's probably a lot that I missed, so also tell me about that in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you liked the video, give it a like, and if you didn't, dislike the video, and tell me what I can improve in the comments. Anyways, I've been Blip. Hope to see you later.